Okay, awesome. All right, so we are starting fresh with the beginning of the English section. Oh, sorry. It's been a long, long day, and I fear that my voice is trying to go out on me. So if you hear me taking gulps, I'm trying to chug my water and stay hydrated. So bear with me. But we are starting fresh with English. This is section one. If you are new here, as I think so many of you are, this is going to cover E.1, Conventions of Standard English, and this is part one of three. So the English portion has three, so we will do an all-in-one on each of those individual sections. So, if you are new, like I said, here are some great resources for you to look back at, and don't feel like you have to rush to get this down now. I will include this in my notes that I send you once we've gone through everything. There are QR codes for everything, and I love it because y'all, it's so hard to type URLs in when they're really long. So, we've got QR codes if you're interested in future free live webinars. If you want to rewatch any of the webinars, so I know someone was asking about the recordings, there you go, the previously recorded ones. The question bank QR code is up here. The on-demand videos. Now, with the all-in-ones, if you are new, these are an overview of that entire section. The on-demand videos, they are going to give you more of that deep dive into very specific subjects and very specific topics within those subjects. So those are a great resource. If you see something tonight and you're like, man, I really need to go and, work on this a little bit more in depth. Tonight, remember, it's just that all in one. The on demand videos give you that more in depth look at everything. If you are interested in tutoring, we got that link. So I'm up there for English and reading. We got Shelly for science and Brandon for math. We do have two new things. They are SurePass and SurePass Pro. So those are ways that you can get discounted bundles. So please, if you are interested in looking at QBank, the videos, check out the bundles because, in this economy, we want to get, as much bang for our buck as we can. So, like I said, tonight we are going to look at the entire first section of English. Now, within that section, they do break it down into three subcategories. So, we're going to take a look at those and kind of pace ourselves based off that. All right. So, I know I threw a lot of information out there at you. Any questions? You're going to hear me ask that a lot tonight because I think that it is important that if you have a question, you feel comfortable enough to ask. Never feel like there is a dumb question, okay? Because most likely, if you're wondering it, someone else might be wondering it too. And if you don't know it, it's always better to ask than sit there and struggle alone. All right, then. So, the first section we're going to look at is spelling conventions and patterns. Then we will move into the second section where we will look at punctuation practices. And then the third section is demonstrating correct sentence structure. So I will say that the nerd that I am, I absolutely just find so much enjoyment in sections 2 and 3. So this is one of my favorite all-in-ones to do. All right, so oops, let me move my chat over. How much does it cost for tutoring? So there are different pricing options. I don't want to misquote you, so um, you might want to check out the QR code because I think there's different pricing options. I can't quite remember off the top of my head what the two are because we did change those around recently. But if you're wondering, and if you want to, if you're still around at the end of the webinar, remind me again, and I don't mind looking it up for you at the end of the evening. I can do that though, if you just remind me, because heavens, I will probably forget. But yeah, but that's a great question. I'm gonna write that down because that's something I need to learn off the top of my head. I don't really ever approach it from that side, so and I don't handle that, so I hadn't really thought about it. Um, any other questions? Actually, I'm going to write that down so you don't have to remind me. If you're still around at the end of the night, I will look it up. Okay. Yep. So after we finish up all of our practice, I will definitely look this up and I will let you know. Yep. Okay, so for standard English spelling conventions and patterns, this is the first section of the first section, and it's a wild ride. So, how can I watch this recording later? Oh, okay, sorry. So this QR code right here, you can actually click on that or not click on it, but like take your picture of it. And I'll send this to you so that way you'll have it and you can pull it up on your computer because it might be a little blurry because it's probably very small on your end right now. But I'll send this to you so you can look at that. And then also, I think you can get the recording sent to you. All right, so like I said, there's a lot to cover in this first section. So we're gonna jump right on in. There are several dozen spelling rules, but I am going to highlight the top four that you typically see that are the most problematic for students. So again, we just don't have enough time tonight because I could sit here and I could probably talk about spelling rules for about 5 or 6 hours. There's just that many of them, but we're going to highlight the top four. Check out the on demand videos if you need more of an in depth dive, if this is a subject that you're, or an area that you're finding problematic for you. So, practicing the questions, see how you're doing with them. Take your own Q bank if you're utilizing Q bank, see how you're doing with those. And that'll kind of give you an idea of if is this something you really need to come back to and fine tune. So, oops, my little mouse got away from me. So the four that we're going to look at tonight are the I before E, except after C. We're going to really dive into that one because most people have heard of this, but they don't understand the full scope of it. Then we're going to look at the rule of how to or when to drop the final E, the changing the final Y to an I, and doubling a final consonant, when to do it and when not to do it. So, just jumping right on in, I before E. A lot of us that grew up, in public, well, in almost all schools, I think, we hear that little sing-songy I before E, except after C. How many of you have heard that? Yep. So, this is something that's very common for people to hear, but they don't quite understand, like I said, the full scope of it. This is actually pretty in depth, and there are several different rules and exceptions to this. So, I before E, the general rule with the I before E, just that, the I before E, that's it. When you're spelling a word, if there are the two letters I and E that are used together, like side by side. Not talking about if it's just in the word in general, but when they're used together, side by side, then the I should be located before the E. Okay, so for example, with the word believe, well, you'll notice how there's an E up here and there's an E back here, but we're not really worried about those. We're worried about them when it's connected together. So, how do you know when to put them in what order? Well, when it's just the I and the E, you're going to put the I first. Okay, so it would be IE. So that's why you have believe spelled BELIEVE. However, then we start to pull in the exception rules. And this is the big wording that you have to pay attention to in your questions. This is what trips students up. It's the way the questions are worded. A lot of times it's not the fact that they don't know the correct answer, it's the fact that they don't understand or they're not recognizing the trick wording that's being given to them. So we're going to look at some of the exception rules. So the first one is the one that we've always grown up hearing sing-songy. I before E, except after C. Well, if you have an I and an E that are going to be together, but there's also a C with them, and the C is coming before the two, instead of the I coming first, as it would in the word believe, well, this time when the C is involved and it's right before the pair, you're going to have to switch them and you put the E first. So you put CEI. So ceiling, for example, is CEILING. So if there is a C and the I and E combo are falling behind it, you don't follow the I before E, you put the E in front instead. So That's how that general rule that we've grown up hearing is applied. And most of you probably already knew this. You've heard it so much, you're like, I before E except after C, so you know to put the E first. But hold on to your knickers, okay? So, like, grab your chairs, put your seatbelts on. We're about to go even further into it. Have you ever wondered when you hear that I before E except after C, but then there's all these random, just what seem to be random words that they don't follow that rule? And your teacher's like, well, it just is. There's actually so many different reasons. And like I said, we don't have time to dive into them all tonight. I'm going to hit the high points. But there are so many like rules and reasons why these words are these other exceptions. So, besides the I before E except after C, there's also I before E except when it sounds like an A. Have you heard that one? That one, I never heard of that until I actually started teaching English myself. And actually, it was reading when I started teaching reading classes. Nope, nobody's heard of that one. So here's the thing. Yes, you have the I before E except after C rule, but there's also other exception rules as well. So I before E except when it sounds like an A. What does that mean? That just sounds so weird, right? Well, when you have words and you pronounce them out loud and you hear them, if the IE combo, when pronounced, makes the sound of an A, when the word makes that A sound in it, then you're not going to put the I first, you're going to put the E first. So, for example, when I say, now I have a very southern accent, okay, so just bear with me, okay? You can just taste the cornbread from my accent, it's so thick. But when you say the word beige, you can hear that you don't hear the believe, you don't hear that E sound. You know, you hear beige, beige. You hear an A instead. So when it sounds like an A, when the word being pronounced sounds like an A, then instead of putting the I first, even if the C's not there, you got to put the E first. So that's why beige is spelled Beige. Okay. Same thing with neigh in neighbor, or neigh if that's what you're talking about, what the horses say. So neigh, neighbor, when you pronounce it out loud, neigh, neigh, it makes that A sound. This is the one that really perplexed me when I was little, because I was that child. Like, I wanted to know the mechanics behind things. I have a very, even though I teach English and reading and I have a degree in history, I'm a very math oriented person. And I want to know the mechanics behind things. And that word always perplexed me growing up. And it wasn't until I was actually an adult and I studied it for myself. I had to actually go out. A teacher never taught this to me. And I feel a little gypped. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but I'm going to say I felt a little gypped. Neighbor. I always wondered, why did it have EI when there was no C involved? Well, it's because when it's pronounced, it sounds like an A. And when it makes that phonic sound, that's when you have to keep the EI instead of the IE. Does that make sense? I really like went on a spiral tangent with that. I was like reliving some childhood trauma in vocabulary and phonics. Everybody good? Okay. All right. So I before E. Wait, we went the wrong way. It just like restarted me all over. I'm telling you the technical difficulties here. Now, are the slides going to be available? Yes, they sure are. So as soon as we finish up and we go through them all, I'll post you a link so you can get them as a PDF file. Yep. I've learned that PDF is the most accessible for people. So PDF. Yep. You're welcome. So now, like I said, this is just one of many exceptions. There are other basic exceptions. So there are some words like neither, weird, foreign, leisure, seas, codeine. These all are an exception to the I before E rule. See that right there? And they don't have a C. Notice how neither, or neither, depending on how you pronounce it, weird, foreign, leisure, C's, codeine, none of them have a C right in front of them, but yet they still are EI. And it's because they do have a phonic reason why, when you pronounce them, typically, it's because of the way they sound that you're going to put the EI first. And like I said, there's not enough time in tonight for me to go through them. Like one's a double E rule, like geese, when it makes that E sound, like C's. There's a lot of those rules. So if that's something that you feel that you might need to go back to, make a note really quick for yourself and check out those on-demand videos because they break them down based off that. So that's the quick rundown of the I before E. Now, another common spelling rule that tends to trip people up is the dropping the final E rule. So, when do I drop the E off when adding suffixes? When do I drop the E off in general? Well, we're going to take a look at that. So, if you have a word that ends with an E, like believe, right here, and you add a suffix to that word that ends in the E, so we're adding a suffix to the word believe that ends in an E. Now, remember, side note, a suffix is added to the end of a word. Okay, so we're adding it to the end of the word. Well, if you're adding a suffix to an end of an E word or to a word that ends in an E, then if that suffix begins with a vowel, remember vowels are A, E, I, O, U, okay? Then if that suffix begins with a vowel, you will drop the E off from the original word. So that's why in believe ends in an E. And if we add the suffix able, begins with that vowel A, then when you add the two together, you simply drop that E from the end and then merge the two together. So that's why you get this spelling right here. Same thing with advise. It ends in an E. And if I add the suffix ing, begins with that vowel I, then I drop the E off and I simply just merge the two together and I get advising, ADVISING. No E will remain. Same thing with guidance. If we add the ANCE suffix, begins with the A, we drop the E and we get guidance spelled this way. So if the suffix, the word, the part of the word that is being added to the base word begins with a vowel, you drop the E off. And the reason in my mind, there's probably some more academic way to say this, but I don't know about y'all, but I got to try to remember little tips and tricks to make it like in really short ways to help it be easy for me to remember. I just always remember that if I'm adding a suffix that has a vowel, I can't put another vowel side by side. I put them, I just remember that I can't have those two vowels side by side. That's just wonky looking, you know? Now, if that suffix begins with a consonant, remember that's any letter beside those vowels. So anything in the alphabet, A through Z, if it's not A, E, I, O, U, it's a consonant. So if the suffix that's being added to the root word begins in a consonant, then you just leave the E. Because again, like I said, in my brain, I keep it straight that, well, I can't have two vowels side by side, so I got to drop the E off. It's like the weak link. But if the suffix has a consonant, then I'm not putting two vowels side by side. Everything's kosher. We're good to go. So, for example, with nice, ends in an E, I want to add the suffix ly, Ly to it. Well, that begins with the consonant L. Well, it's okay to put a vowel and a consonant side by side. So, I just add the two together. And you get nicely, Nicely. See that? Same thing with amazement. I'm adding a suffix that begins with the consonant M. So a vowel and a consonant, they can go side by side. That's all hunky dory. So just put the two together and you get amazement. AMAZE ment. Same thing with rudeness. Consonant for an N, you can put the two together and just merge them. No need to drop the E off at all. So two vowels side by side, as I have a friend that says, we can't do that. So, if you got a vowel and a consonant, thumbs up, put them together. Now, there are a few exceptions because, with English, it's one of the most complicated languages on the earth. I mean, I really think that. And I teach English, so I feel like I'm okay with saying that. But it is very difficult. And with English, nothing is ever 100%. It's always going to have an exception. Somewhere, there's going to be an exception. So there are a few exceptions with dropping the final E. So, for example, when you have agree as your root word, it's got two E's at the end. I mean, could we have picked a more challenging word to look at? Well, when you have that E at the end, if you add a suffix that begins with a vowel, remember I had said there's two vowels together, you can't do that, you got to drop the E. Well, but here's the thing. Take a look. If you drop the E off right there, what's right before it? Another E. I mean, so you didn't really do anything, did you? By dropping that E off, you still have another vowel side by side, and you've already used up your drops because you can only drop one. So you didn't really do anything to fix it. So that's why the rule is like you can't have two. In my head, I just keep it in mind that you can't have two vowels side by side, but three is okay. It's like two wrongs don't make a right, but the enemy of my enemy is my E. That's how I don't know. That's how I keep it in straight. But the rule is like if there's two vowels on the end of the root word, and then you're adding another vowel with the suffix, then you just leave it alone. And then the same thing with advantageous. So that's another exception rule. There's a couple more. And again, we just unfortunately don't have enough time tonight to dive so in depth into that. So take a look and check out those on demand videos if you feel like you need to look and refresh on some of these. Okay. All right. So I've talked a little bit. I've ranted, I've raved about letter choices. Everybody hanging in okay? All right. So changing the final Y to an I. So when you have a root word that ends in a Y, if you add a suffix, so again, we're looking at adding onto the end of the word. If you add a suffix to that word that ends in the Y, and the Y, this is where we got to go back and look at the root word a little bit more. You have to look at the letter that comes before the Y and see if that letter is a consonant. If that letter is a consonant, then you will change the Y to an I and then add on whatever the suffix is. We're not really worried about what letters the suffix starts with just right this second. We're looking at the letter that comes before the Y in the root word. So with Y ending words, how do you know when to change the Y to an I when you've got suffixes added onto them? So what you do is you look at the Y. So for example, with beauty, it ends in a Y. The letter that comes before beauty or before the Y in beauty is T. And T is a consonant. So since it's a consonant, you will change the Y to an I when adding any suffix to the end of it or adding a suffix to the end of it. So for example, with beautiful, BEA, you, because there's a T and that's a consonant, we change the Y to an I, so it's IFUL. So beautiful. Same thing with worry, that root word ends in a Y. The letter before the Y is an R, which is a consonant. So I drop the Y, change it to an I, and I get worried, WORRIED. So with the Y ending words, we're looking at the letter that comes right before it. Now, if the Y has a vowel in front of it, so for example with day, D-A-Y, right in front of that Y, it has a vowel, A. When you have a vowel, you're not going to drop off the Y. You're going to leave it because you don't want to drop the Y and add an I, and then guess what? Then you would have two vowels side by side. And I've told you that for phonic reasons, we don't want to have two vowels side by side like that. So we wouldn't want it to be D-A-I-S, you know. So that's why it stays days, D-A-Y-S, because before the Y, there's an A, and that's a vowel, so we don't want to drop it off. Same thing with obey, has an E in front of it. Relay has an A in front of it. So with both of those, no matter what that suffix was, we didn't drop the Y, we just left it alone. So if it's a consonant, you drop it and change it to an I. If it's a vowel, you leave it alone. Now, there is one big exception to this rule, because again, there's always going to be an exception. Just go ahead and know there's always going to be an exception. So do not change that Y if the root word ends in a Y, and even if the letter that comes before it is a consonant. So for example with cry, C-R-Y, well, it has the vowel, it has the, no, it has the consonant R in front of the Y. So that would say, oh, I got to change my Y to an I. Well, you would if the suffix was ed, cried, C-R-I-E-D. However, if the suffix begins with an I, you don't want to drop the Y and change it to an I if you're already adding an I suffix to it. Because then what you would be doing is you would be creating a double I. And that would just be a lot. When your hand get tired of dotting both of those I's side by side, probably not really, but that's how I keep it in my head. So I just don't want to have two I's side by side. So for example, if I were to follow the rule, and because it has that R consonant in front of it, that tells me I'm supposed to drop the Y and change it to an I. But then if I add the ing onto then it would have been spelled C-R-I-I-N-G. And that just looks really weird. So we don't do it. We leave the Y, and then we just add the suffix onto it. Same thing with worry. You just saw right here on this one. When we added the ed suffix, it changed to an I. But, hold on. When I add the suffix ing, because it begins with an I leave the Y because I don't want to drop the Y, change it to an I, and then have two I's side by side. Just don't want to do that. Same thing with supply. It's got the consonant, so I technically should change it, but because of the suffix, I'm not going to. Okay? Any questions about that? Are y'all learning some new stuff here? Oh, thank you. Now, there are a couple other exceptions. Like I said, always going to be exceptions. And again, I wish we had enough time to go into them all in depth. But like I said, I could sit here and talk about these spelling rules for 5 or 6 hours just on these ones alone. But there are some other exceptions with the Y to I rule. So shyly, day, daily, memorize. So if again you struggle with something like these, make sure to go check those out in the on-demand videos as well. Okay. Now the last big spelling rule that we're going to look at tonight is doubling a final consonant. Now this one is very complex. It is very tricky. I'm gonna preface by saying all this because if you don't get hold of this tonight and you don't get the hang of it, please do not berate yourself because this one is a very tricky rule. This one takes a lot of practice. Okay, so if you find that this is one you're struggling with when we do practices and stuff, then just make a note and go back and just practice and practice because this is not one that I would expect my students, if I were teaching, if we were in like a legit class and I was teaching and grading you, I wouldn't give you a test at the end of day one or a quiz and expect you to know this after 10 minutes of studying it. Okay. So again, I say that because I don't want you to be very difficult. Yes, exceptions. I do hate the exceptions. I don't know why we have so many of them, but they keep life interesting, I guess. So doubling a final consonant. When a verb, so this is where you have to look at the word that's being spelled and being analyzed, and you have to ask yourself, oh, okay, what part of speech is it? Well, if it's a verb, remember that could be an action or a linking verb. If that verb or that word is a verb and it ends in a consonant, hold on. Is everybody sitting down? Okay, I'm so glad. Put your seatbelts on too. So, when a verb ends in a consonant, you're going to double the final consonant, so that last letter of the word when it's a consonant, when a single vowel precedes the final consonant and the last syllable of the word is stressed after the ending is added. Wow, that's a lot. I mean, if you just look at that, you're like, I don't know about y'all, but I would just sit there and I'd be like, do it now? Say what? Let's repeat that. So, let's look at it in action, okay? Because it's a little bit easier to break down this rule when you can see it in action. And my favorite word to use is blur. And that is because I have such a strong accent that I can really do a great job of stressing these letters. Just not tooting my own horn, but I'm just saying. So, blur. Hear that word? Blur. Very short. It's a very small word, but it's very powerful. So, that word is a verb. If you blur something, okay, we're talking about the action of blurring something. Like you're going to blur it. Do you know what that means? Like when you blur it out? Like when you blur your social security number out of something, or they blur people's names out on TV, or things that shouldn't be shown on TV. Things like that. That's the action we're talking about when you're blurring it out. So this is an action verb. Okay, blur. And it ends in the letter. Why won't that go away? There we go. So it ends in the letter R. The letter R is a consonant. So it's a verb that ends in a consonant right there. So we've checked off those two things. It's a verb. It ends in the consonant R. You're going to double that consonant right there. Double the final consonant. When a single, so that's one, just one, vowel comes before that final consonant. So in the original word, the consonant that ends the word R has a vowel. And notice there's an L before it. That's a consonant. So there's only one vowel right there in front of it, the U. It's consonant, vowel, consonant, L-U-R. Consonant, vowel, consonant. So it has one vowel right in front of it. So when we add a suffix onto it, how do we know if we should just leave it as one R or if we should double it? Well, because it has the R with that single vowel in front of it, and when I say the last syllable, blur, there's two syllables, blur. So when I say that last syllable, the last syllable is stressed. So when I say it, blur, do you hear how hard it sounds? It's not very soft. So it's very hard. It's stressed. Blur. Er. Er. I know you're gonna hate me by the time we're done talking about this. But see how I told you my accent really helps. So when you say it, it has that stress on it. So because of that, when you add on a suffix, and in this case it's the ing, ing, you're going to double and put two R's instead. Okay, so that's why it becomes from blur and you add on the suffix ing. You don't just do BLURING. You don't just add the two or put the two together. Nope, you gotta go in and you gotta double the consonant, so it's BLURRING. Wow, that was a lot, right? I mean, it's really kind of mathematical if you think about it, because it's got to be consonant, vowel, consonant, and then you double it. But when a word has two or more syllables, okay, so like the word begin, when a blur, that was just one syllable. Why was I overstressing it? Blur. Blur. No, it's just blur. It's just one syllable. Sorry. But anyways, when the word has two or more syllables, if the last syllable of the original word is stressed, and there's that single vowel like we just talked about that comes before that consonant, when you add the suffix onto the end of it, you're going to double the consonant for that one as well. So this is kind of like an additional rule. So even if it's one syllable or it's two syllables, you're going to always, no matter what, if there's a consonant with a vowel right in front of it, a single vowel right in front of it, then you're going to double that consonant that it ended with. So for example, begin, n, n. See here you hear how that's a strong into the word begin. So with that, I have it ends in a consonant N, has a single vowel I, because right before that there's a G, so that's a consonant. So I got a single vowel I in front of it, and I'm adding a suffix, so I'm going to double up on that N and get BEGINNING. That one's a lot, don't you think? So sit on that one, think on that one, practice on that one. Again, it's quite a bit. So, those are the four basic spelling rules. Now, with spelling, there are other reasons why you would have misspelled words. When you get to your test and you're asked different questions, a lot of the times they're not going to sit here and give you the spelling rule. I mean, they might in some, like, they might in a broad sense, but they're not going to really, like, break it down. In some cases, they're just going to give you sentences and you've got to be able to identify the misspelled word. Well, we've talked about some of the common spelling rules, but there's also a couple other reasons for misspelled words. Not that the word necessarily is misspelled per se, like the letters are wrong. It's just maybe you didn't spell the right word. So, a couple of those categories that we're going to look at now are homophones, apostrophes, inappropriate separation or joining, and then tying with that, we're going to look at compound words. Everybody okay right now? Any questions? Okay. All right, so first things on this section is homophones. Well, what is a homophone? You got to know the terminology in order to understand what you're looking for. So, this is where you have two or more words that have the same pronunciation. So, that means when you say them out loud, they sound just alike, but they have different meanings. They come from different origins, and or, I put or, but really it could be and or. They have different spellings. Okay? Because again, with the English language, it's just going to take you for a wild ride every single time. I mean, it really is. So, for example, very common, new in EW versus new KNEW. When I pronounce them, new and new, they sound just alike. Sounds like just the same word. Sounds like I'm just saying it double time. But as you can see right here, they are spelled differently. One has a K in it, the other one does not. According to Merriam-Webster, that's my source. Okay, always cite your sources. But the word new, NEW, means having recently come into existence. You know, like a new baby has just been born. But the word new, KNEW, is the past tense of to know, the knowledge. Okay? So they mean two different things. So they sound just alike, but they mean two different things, and they are spelled two different ways. Then you have some words that are like red. Sorry, I'm telling you, I'm having to hydrate so much tonight. So I read the book yesterday. Well, this one's a real doozy because READ, that could be pronounced read, past tense. You could pronounce it read, present tense, but in this one, you know that they were saying read because it happened yesterday. But sometimes you might see where they put RED. When you say it out loud, I read the book yesterday. Read sounds like the right word, but when you see it in writing, you see it's RED. That's what? What is RED? That is a color, yes. So there's another way that you have to look for homophones. Somebody gave me the example of 8, ATE, 8, EIGHT, like I ate the bowl of cereal. 8 is my favorite number. So, yes, bear and bear, BARE, BEAR. Yes, those are both homophones, or both sets of homophones. And check out the on demand because I used to have a really big, in depth video of those. I don't know if it's still up there or not, but yes, I would, if this is something you struggle with, definitely look those up, make you some flashcards. I just, honestly, when I studied them, I would just make me a list on paper and just kind of practice familiarizing myself. But I always just proofread everything. And here's a trick for this, and you can actually apply this to some of the stuff we're going to talk about in sections 2 and 3. You're going to think I sound crazy, but just hold on, hear me out. When you're reading your sentences and you're reading your questions, okay? Now, I don't know where everybody's going to test at, but sometimes you can test remotely and you can kind of test by yourself. So you might could actually talk out loud. If you can, I strongly suggest when you're reading sentences like this, say them out loud. Because a lot of times when you say it out loud, you're forcing your brain to take one more step to process it. And it can really make a difference in breaking down and analyzing word usage. Now, if you have to go somewhere and you're testing in a place that's quiet, this is where I want you to hear me out. I still want you to pretend that you're saying it out loud. Don't just read it, because a lot of times when we read it, our brain kind of just like glosses over it and it kind of knows what it should be, but it doesn't fully process it. Pretend, go inside your head, okay? Don't talk to yourself and then answer yourself, and people worry about you. But ask ask yourself, okay, what would this sound like if I was saying it? So actually pretend like you're saying it out loud, because again, you're making your brain go one step further with processing it, and it might make the difference in being able to identify misspelled words. Okay. If you've never done that before, try it tonight when we're doing some of these practice questions. See if you can see what I'm talking about. Because I tell you, my students, especially in my seated classes, you should see the looks that people give me sometimes when I've told them this. And then guess what? They're in their reading class and they go to take a test, and I can see them over there and they're pretending to say it. They don't think I see them, but I see them. And then they're doing it. And guess what? Then they get it right. I'm just saying, sometimes the unorthodox works. Now, another way that words can be misspelled that you want to be on the lookout for are apostrophes. So these are words, they're words that contain apostrophes. They can oftentimes be misspelled, or they're misspelled because they use an apostrophe incorrectly. So, for example, a big common one, hello there. A common one that you'll see is its, ITS. Now, this is the possessive form of it. This is where you're saying the dog lost its bone. Whose bone is it? It's its bone, it being the dog. Now, typically when we're showing possession of something, we would put an apostrophe S. So if I say that is the boy's bicycle, you would say boy, BOY, apostrophe S. Whose bicycle? The boy's bicycle, apostrophe S. However, with this pronoun, You don't put the apostrophe S to show possession. And that's because when you have IT apostrophe S's can also stand for, or apostrophes can also be used for contractions. And with the pronoun it, when you use the apostrophe S, it's a contraction for it is. So it kind of supersedes the possessive ability, and that's why its is showing possessive form. Whose bone is it? Its bone. When it apostrophe s is going to represent the contraction it is. Remember, contraction is just a condensed form of two words when you put two words together. So if I say it's it apostrophe s, a pleasure to meet you, I'm really saying it is a pleasure to meet you. Now, on the test, they might give you a sentence and they'll say, oh, well, which word is spelled incorrectly? And they might have put, instead of it apostrophe s, they put it's its a pleasure to meet you. Well, if you see that, you're like, well, it's not showing possession. There needs to be not a comma, excuse me, an apostrophe, because I'm supposed to be saying it is a pleasure to meet you. So that's just an example of how that might be, um, that might be a way that it's represented. All right. So any questions about the apostrophe part? All right. So another set that you want to look out for is words that have inappropriate separation or inappropriate joining. So this is when you have words that are either separated, so that means they've been split apart when they shouldn't have, or they've been joined together when they shouldn't have. So this can create a misuse of words as well, and you want to be on the lookout for them. So for example, this is one that not many people think of. If you have the word be space cause, so it's two separate words, because most people recognize the second one because because since it is a very common word. However, a lot of people are not familiar with the phrase because, because heavens, this is going to get tricky. I got to change my wording up. They're not familiar with that wording since they don't typically word things and phrase things in that way. So when you use it, let's look at the second one since that's the more popular one. Because, the for the reason or by the reason. Okay? I was late to work because I had a flat tire. Why was I late to work? What was the reason for being late to work? Because I had a flat tire. The flat tire is the reason for being late to work. However, if you take that word and you separate it and you have be space cause, because this means being the reason for an action, not for the reason or by the reason, but being the reason. So her dedication and hard work proved to be cause. So it's kind of like you're saying be the cause of or for her promotion. That's how I remember it. Be, and then that space in my mind represents the word the. So be the cause for her promotion. Why did she get the promotion? Since she had dedication and she worked hard. So there's the difference there. That's an example of how it should be separated or how it should be together. And depending on how it's used, this is the appropriate separation. If I had used the word because as one word up here instead, that would have been inappropriate joining. Same thing if I had put the space here in the I was late for work, B space cause I had a flat tire, that would be inappropriate separation. So it really just depends on how it's being used in the sentence, if it's inappropriate separation or inappropriate joining. Now with words like a lot, this is used as a pronoun to mean many. I have a lot of dogs. I have many dogs. The word alot altogether, That actually is not a real word. Did you know that? Let's see. I don't know if I can zoom in too far. I know someone said zoom in, but let's see if I can get it to. Is that a little better? I'm not sure what it'll look like on other pages, so I may have to zoom out. But anyways, so the word allot, A-L-O-T, that's actually not a real word. People have used it incorrectly so much that others have started to think that it's actually a word, but it's not. It's not a real word. You should not use it because it's not a word that exists. It's been made up. What they were trying to say was they were trying to say a space lot. Now the word allot, A-L-L-O-T, that's actually a verb, and that means you've assigned it or distributed. I have allotted enough time to accomplish this task. I have assigned enough time to accomplish this task. So that's some, again, different examples of inappropriate separation or joining. Now, kind of tying with that, but not really, compound words. There's a lot of times that people have grown up. What? You said OMG. What? I'm curious. Tell me in the comments. Anyways, so with compound words, there are words that we've grown up putting them together or putting a hyphen in them, and we didn't realize that we weren't supposed to be doing that. So, for example, you can say outside as two separate words, but when you're referencing to like the outdoors, you're really supposed to use one word, outside. Ice cream, I have seen where people will put ice cream as one word. They think it's one word together, but it's actually two separate. Oh, yeah, a lot. Yeah, that's a fake word. That's not real. But ice cream, most of you probably know this, but there's been some times I've seen it where ice cream is not one word, it's two words. Babysit, a lot of people try to put a hyphen with that, and it's actually just one word, babysit. High school, again, people think that that one is a hyphen, but that one's not a hyphen, and it's not one word, it's two words. So just make sure you familiarize yourself with compound words as well. A couple other things to keep in mind. These are ones that you want to be on the lookout for when you're being asked about spelling options. Make sure you remember those exceptions to the plural, because typically when you take a word and you go from singular to plural, you're just adding on an S or an ES. Well, there are, again, as always, exceptions to that rule. So many different exceptions. And a couple of them are when you have man and you go to plural, it becomes men with an E. Goose. Oh, it did not copy over. I remember pasting all these. Oh, my formatting. Anyways, goose becomes geese. Cactus becomes cacti. Now it's funny because goose becomes geese, but moose does not become meese. Okay? Moose is actually just moose as a plural. It does not change spelling. Moose, one, moose, plural. Cactus becomes cacti. If you're taking a class and your professor gives you a syllabus and you have multiple classes, so you have multiple syllabi, child becomes children, life becomes lives, box becomes boxes, coach becomes coaches. So if it ends in an X or a CH, you get an ES added onto the end. If it ends in an FE, it's going to have a VES added to the end. So just make sure that you are on top of your singular to plural spelling changes. All right, so we've reached our first practice for the night. Any questions before we do this practice? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this off my screen somehow. Whoopsie. There we go. Yeah. All right, so we've got 2 questions right here. I'm going to put 2 minutes on the timer. I want you to read through these very carefully and think about what they're asking you before you make your answer selection, okay? All right, so, and both of these are select all that applies, so take that into consideration. Everybody ready? All right, 2 minutes on the timer starting now. All right, let's take a look, see what we got. So for number 1, I tricked you. I'm sorry. Even though it says select all that applies, there was only one. Hold on, let me check. Why do I feel like let me just double check that because I feel like I tricked myself just now. Yes, it was. Oh, I doubted my own self. Heavens to Betsy, don't do that. All right, so for number 1, it was just D, ceiling. So which is an exception to a spelling rule. So remember, I before E except after C. So in A, let's just go through them really quick just in case you missed them. So with A, leisure, it should be L-E-I. It is an exception to a spelling rule. I before E except after C. But it should be spelled E-I. It gave you a word that is an exception, but it was spelled wrong, so that can't be an answer option. That rules it out because it's spelled wrong. Hygiene, I before E, except after, well, I before E. So that follows the spelling rule, I before E. So that one's spelled correctly. Remember, we're looking for one that's spelled correctly and follows it or shows an exception to a spelling rule. Conceit, I before E except after C. So based off of this, there's a C. It should have been spelled Conceit. So that one's an exception because it's except C. But again, it's spelled incorrectly, so that rules it out. Because it says spelled correctly and an exception. Ceiling, I before E except after C. So CEILING. So D was actually the only correct answer, even though I was very mean and I tricked you and I said select all that apply. Because you got to be ready for anything. You got to be a ninja. Oh, I know. I know. I'm so mean. But I'm going to get you ready for that test. That's what I'm going to do. Which of the following, number 2, which of the following uses the Y to I rule correctly? Select all that apply. This one I followed through, and I had 2 correct answers. So beauty, just like we talked about beauty, beautiful, because it's got that T, that consonant, it changes to an I. Obey, because it's got an E in front of it, it's a vowel. So remember, I don't drop the I and change it to an I because I don't want 2 vowels side by side. So obey. So it follows the Y to I rule. We didn't talk about exceptions. We didn't do anything like that. The Y to I has 2 parts to the rule. The consonant part, if it has a consonant before it, or second part being if it has the vowel in front of it. So just remember that. And A showed the consonant rule. B showed the vowel rule, or the vowel part of the rule. And C, that one's spelled wrong because the Y should be an I, and then here it should be IES. All right, any questions on those? All right. Well, if you've got it in you, I think you can still see this. I'm trying to stay zoomed in, but is that okay for everybody? Oh, hold on. Somebody did have a question. Sorry, I didn't see it in the other chat box. So for number 1, why was B not correct? So I before E is the rule itself. Okay, so the word's spelled correctly. It should be IE. However, it was saying it needs to be spelled correctly and it needs to show an exception. This doesn't show an exception. It's spelled correctly, but it doesn't show the exception. It follows the rule I before E. So we needed like I before E except after C like it was in D. Or if it had been I before E except if it sounds like an A. We needed it to do that one step further of that exception. All right, so we got 3 questions here, but I'm still only going to put 2 minutes on the timer just to see how you work under a time constraint, and then we'll come back and check those, okay? All right, ready, steady, go. All right, just a few more seconds. All right, I think everybody's finished. Let's go ahead and take a look. So for number 1, which of the following statements is correct? That one is D. Remember, if it ends in an F, it's going to change when plural to VES at the end. If it ends in an FE, same thing, it should be VES. If it ends in an X, it should be XES. And, well, shelf, it ends in the F. Number 2, which of the following words correctly follows the spelling rule to drop the final E? So this one, it tells you which specific rule you're trying to look for. See, this one, it didn't really. But remember, advising, that one would be the correct one because if it ends in an E and then we're adding that ing that begins with a suffix begins with an I, we have to drop the E off. And then number 3, which of the following is spelled correctly, showing an exception? This is really the part that trips people up. Make sure you're paying attention to the fact that it's saying it is spelled correctly and it needs to show an exception to a spelling rule. So, beige. Well, there's an I and an E together. Remember, I before E except after C, but there's also those other exceptions. If it sounds like an A, beige sounds like an A, so it should be EI. So it's spelled incorrectly, so that automatically rules it out. It is an exception to a rule, I before E, except it sounds like an A. They just didn't spell, or, well, it was me, but I just didn't spell it correctly here. Caffeine, I before E, except, and this is one of the ones we didn't get into the nitty gritty of, but this one's if it sounds like the E, caffeine, then it has to be EI. So it's spelled correctly, and it is an exception to the spelling rule. Fierce, this one's supposed to be I before E. It's not an exception. It's supposed to be FIER. Truly, that one is supposed to drop the E because it has the consonant LY suffix being added to it. All right, any questions on those? And again, if you missed a couple of these, you didn't get a perfect score. If you're trying to say you didn't get 5 out of 5 and you're beating yourself up over it, please do not. Because remember, you just probably learned this tonight, right? And we've only been talking about it for 20, 30, 40 minutes. So you're just learning. You're just getting exposed to it. So this is just really meant to show you what areas you need to now go in and kind of look over with a fine tooth comb. So don't beat yourself up. Don't feel like you're, you know, I don't know. I don't know how you're feeling. But don't feel bad. Don't beat yourself up over it. Just remember, you just learned this, okay? You need to sit on it. Let it sink in, resonate. Then practice some more because practice makes perfect. All right? Any questions? And again, like I said, be very careful with the way that the questions are worded. Examples like number 3. What do you mean? Like more practice questions like that? Do I have another one? I do. I think. Oh, heavens. Hold on, we went all sideways. That's what I get when I zoom in. Um, yeah. Okay. So here's another practice I got for you. All right, ready? I think this one's the last one I have for tonight. But if not, definitely check out the Q Bank because there's a ton of them that I put in there. All right, so I'm going to set a minute and a half for this one and see how we do. Okay, ready, set, go. All right, take a few more seconds. I see some people still typing, so go ahead and finish up, and then we're going to take a look. All right, so let's take a look. So for number one, the answer was B and C. Number two was C, agree. Number three is A and D. All right, any questions on those? Number three. All right, so which of the following are spelled correctly? So that's part one, showing an exception to a spelling rule. So weird. W-E-I-R-D. I before E except after. And this is the one where it makes the sound. We didn't talk about this one, but that's what that rule is there. Again, there's so many with those I before E that really you need a deep dive into. So with I before E except after when it makes the sound, weird, weird. Yes, I know. I have to really push the boundaries of pronunciation there. But that's an exception. So it is EI. So it's spelled correctly and it's an exception to the I before E rule. Awesome. That one is pertaining to the drop the E rule, but um but that's not one of those exceptions because of the consonant. Timely, C, no, letter C, that one actually is spelled incorrectly, so that's automatically going to take it out of the running to be a correct answer. You know it's spelled incorrectly because it's supposed time ends in an E, and you added a suffix that begins with a consonant, so you don't drop the E off. So it's not an exception to a rule, and it was spelled incorrectly, so that's why C was knocked out of that one. Modifying, remember when you drop the Y and change to an I, because it's got that F with the consonant in front of it, technically I should drop that Y and change it to an I, but because I'm adding the suffix ing to it, I don't drop the Y. So it's spelled correctly because I kept the Y. So I spelled it correctly. And it's an exception to the drop the Y rule. So that's number 3. Someone did ask about number 2 as well. So let's go back to that one. Number 2. So the exception to the spelling rule of dropping the E. So with this one, bake. Well, if you notice, none of them have suffixes added onto the end of it. So my go-to is always the ing because it is kind of like the Mac Daddy of suffixes. It's really going to kind of help hit all those exception rules. So if I were to add the suffix ing to the end of bake, okay, would I drop the E? Yes, I would, because it has the K in front of it. It's got that suffix. Would I drop the E off of the end of like if I added ing onto the end of it? Yes, I would, because it's got the K, that not suffix, it's got that consonant. That K is a consonant, not suffix. It's got that K, that consonant in front of it. So remember, if it's got that E and it's got that consonant in front of it, you're going to drop it off. Agree. That's one of those ones I told you was that weird exception because it's got that double vowel in front of it. Hope, same thing. I'm going to drop that off when I add the ing to it because it's got that P in front. So E, because it has that, typically, remember, if it ends in an E, then you're going to drop that if you have a suffix that has a vowel. So if I add ing, I would drop the E off, but because it's got that double vowel there, I don't drop it off. All right, any other questions? And then we do have to move on to part 2 for time. Everybody good that had questions? All right. Oh, wait, I lied. I have one more practice. Do you have it in you? I forgot I had this one. This one is the ones this is the type that I was telling you about where it's just that open question. Where they don't really point out like you're looking for an exception, whatever. They just give you a sentence and they want you to find the correct word. So take a minute. I'm going to put a minute on the timer for this one, okay? See how you do with that time. And then tell me if you can figure out which words are spelled incorrectly, okay? Ready, set, and go. All right, just a few seconds left. All right, let's take a look. So again, with these are the types of questions where you're just going to have the sentence and you're going to have to figure out which word is spelled incorrectly. So you have to go through and you have to analyze each word in the sentence. So for number 1A, leisurely, it was spelled incorrectly. Remember, I before E except after C, or if it sounds like that E sound, this is one of those exceptions we didn't talk about, but it should be EI. Number 2, separate should be separate with an A instead of an E. Oh, I don't know why it was F. I don't know why my lettering got off there. Something happened when I was formatting it. But anyway, so for number 2, it should have been F. I kept wondering why y'all were putting Fs. I didn't even look over there. All right, so A and F. Any questions? All right. I do have some extra. Wait, where does these come from? I think these got cut off from something because those are answer keys. Sorry. That's just an extra slide that wasn't supposed to be included. All right, so we do need to move on to 1.2. So this is using standard punctuation practices. In this section, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about different sentence types. This is very big and very important for this section. You must be able to diagram your sentences and be able to determine what type of sentence you're looking at. So for this section, we're going to look at simple, compound, complex, and compound complex sentences and what each of those are made up of. So before we begin looking at that, we do need to make sure we touch on some terminology to make sure you understand some terms that we're going to be using tonight. So clauses. If you have a clause, that means that you're looking at a group of words that has a subject, a verb, and maybe a complete thought. It has to have a subject and a verb, but depending on what type of clause it is, it might have a complete thought, it might not have a complete thought. If it is an independent clause, that means you're going to have the subject, you're going to have the verb, and it will express a complete thought. It will make sense. So if I go walking down the street and I come across Billy Bob and I say the sentence to him, Billy Bob is going to know what I'm talking about. This means that it is a standalone, complete sentence. If it is independent, it can stand alone. You know, I always think back to Beyonce's All the Single Ladies, they are independent. The rain makes me sleepy. What's that sentence about? It's about the rain. What is it doing? It's making. Who is it making? Me. What is it making me? Sleepy. I've got that subject, rain, that verb, makes, and it expresses that complete thought. Now, if you have a dependent clause, you're going to still have a subject, you're going to have a verb, it will not express a complete thought. It's going to leave the reader questioning, it's going to leave the reader hanging in a sense. So if I say, while the rain continues to pour, well, Billy Bob's going to look at me and go, what about when it's raining or when it continues to pour? You know, we've not finished out the thought. So it has that subject, rain, it has that verb, continues, but it does not express that complete thought. So that's where it gets tricky with identifying different clauses because they both have subjects and verbs. And it's not a clause if it doesn't have a subject and a verb. But you have to look at, does it have the subject and the verb, but does it express a complete thought or not? So if it can stand alone, it has the complete thought, it's an independent clause. If it doesn't, it's a dependent clause. Now, we talked about clauses, and we're going to reference those in how to distinguish what type of sentence you're looking at. So when you have a simple sentence, this means that you're going to have one independent clause, just one independent clause. So subject, verb, complete thought. This is going to be punctuated by a period at the end of the sentence because we're not connecting multiple clauses. It's just one, you're done. So the rain makes me very sleepy, period. Now, there might be a comma in there somewhere if there is adjectives or if there are um mm, introductory phrases. Sorry, that was escaping me for some reason. But introductory phrases, that's a different reason. But right now we're looking at just identifying those clause types. Now, if you have a compound sentence, this means that it's going to compound. So that means it's going to combine. It's going to have two independent clauses. So still a subject and a verb and a complete thought, but two times. Two separate subjects, two separate verbs, two separate complete thoughts. They won't be combined together. Now, when you have two independent clauses, they can be connected in several different ways. And that's what you have to be able to check for as well with this section. Because one, you've got to be able to identify, okay, where are the clauses? What are the clauses? Two, okay, based off the clauses that I have, whether they're independent or dependent, what type of sentence? That's step two. What type of sentence do I have? Well, then you have to look and say, okay, well, based off where the clauses are located at within the sentence, and, since I know what type of sentence it is because of the clauses, where would my punctuation go? That's what they're testing you on here. It's 3 steps to be able to get that final answer. Where are the clauses? Once you find the clauses, what type of sentence it is, okay, where are the clauses at in that type of sentence to determine what punctuation is needed. So if you have a compound sentence, you're going to have 2 independent clauses. And like I said, they can be connected in different ways. If you have an independent clause, so like I've labeled right here, independent clause, and then you have what we call a coordinating conjunction in between them, and then the second independent clause comes, then you're going to put a comma before the coordinating conjunction. So those coordinating conjunctions are those fanboys. You might have heard your English professor say fanboys. That's an acronym for the conjunctions that are used. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. If you have any of these words used to connect an independent clause with another independent clause, to correctly punctuate it, you must put the comma right before it. Now, an example of this would be, the storm arrives this afternoon. That's an independent clause. The storm is the subject, arrives is the verb. When's it coming in? It's this afternoon. I need to bring in my patio furniture. There's a subject, I, verb, need. It's got the complete thought. So I've got 2 independent clauses. Well, I used that coordinating conjunction right there. So I use the conjunction so. I must put that comma. Oh, excuse me. Hold on one second, y'all. Ooh, sorry. My voice just like completely went out. All right. So when you put that there, you must put that comma in front of the coordinating conjunction. Now remember, that's important. It has to go in front of that coordinating conjunction. They'll try to trick you sometimes by putting the comma after the conjunction. Be on the lookout. You must be diligent in looking and checking to make sure the comma is before the conjunction, not after that conjunction. Okay? Now, another way to punctuate a compound sentence is if you have the independent clause and then the dependent clause, but you don't have any extra words in between them, you can just put a simple semicolon. That is also correct. you can just put the two together and put a semicolon right smack in the middle of them. So, same clauses, using the same clauses so you can see. The storm arrives this afternoon. Semicolon, I need to bring in my patio furniture. So I just use the same clauses, put them there, and I put a semicolon to represent that they need to be connected, but that they're two separate independent clauses. A third way would be to just simply put a period. So the storm arrives this afternoon, period. I need to bring in my patio furniture, period again. So 3 different ways that you could punctuate. So you must be on the lookout because when you're checking those A, B, C, D options, you have to keep this in your back of your mind. These are all the different ways that they could be punctuated correctly. Now, with complex sentences, this is where you're going to have one independent clause and one dependent clause. Now, there's only 2 different ways that they can be structured. And it doesn't have to be that it's always going to be the same way. So, for example, with complex sentences, since you have 2 different types of clauses, you could have the independent clause come first, followed by the dependent clause. If that's the case, then you do not have to put any punctuation between the 2 clauses to connect them. You only need to put the period at the end of the sentence. The reason being is that the dependent clause, when you have a dependent clause, it's going to start off with what we call a subordinating conjunction, and that's used to connect the 2 clauses together. So, for example, I need to bring in my patio furniture. That's that first clause. It's an independent clause. I need to bring in my patio furniture. The second clause is before the storm arrives. So, it's a little bit of a variation of what we saw on the previous slide. Before the storm arrives. Well, before the storm arrives is a dependent clause. Since the independent clause came first, you've got that subordinating conjunction before right there to connect the 2. You don't have to put any punctuation right here. You just put the period at the end of the sentence. Now, if the dependent clause comes first and is followed by the independent clause, that's when you do have to pull in punctuation. You do need to put a comma after the end of the dependent clause before the independent clause begins. So you put that comma there. Before the storm arrives, comma, I need to bring in my patio furniture. You see that? Take a second, look at that. Let me know if you have any questions. All right, so with this one, just remember, if the independent clause comes first, you don't need punctuation except for at the end of the sentence. If the dependent clause comes first, it's just not strong enough to hold the sentence up by itself, so it has to have that comma to help connect it. Now, here's the big boy on campus. So you got the compound complex sentence. So this is taking 2 different sentence types and merging them together. So with a compound sentence, you have 2 independent clauses. With the complex, you have 1 independent, 1 dependent. So with a compound complex sentence, you have 2 independent clauses and at least 1, or it could be more, dependent clauses. So for this, you're going to keep those punctuation rules that we talked about with the compound sentences and the ones that you used with the complex sentences. So this is where you really have to focus on what type of clause is where at in the sentence. You're going to have to look at where the clause is at and how are they connecting to each other, or how do they need to connect to each other. So for example, if I give you this sentence, can it be more than 2 independent clauses? It can be, but I have rarely ever seen that be the case. Because, I mean, at that point, you're just getting way too long-winded. And for the sake of space, I don't think you'll see that on the test, but I could be wrong. But that would be that would be a paragraph. So I don't think you'd see it. Can compound be more than 2? Yes, it could be. Yes. You know, some people like to be that extra. Not I. I'm very simple. Well, I mean, no. I mean, I use compound complex sentences, but I'm just saying, like, I don't go that beyond with it. Um, so if I were to phrase it, before the storm arrives, I need to put my patio furniture away and I need to move my car. It is so complicated. That's why I think it's one of the most difficult languages to learn. They say that if you're a non-native English speaker and you're coming in trying to learn the language, it's so much more difficult. Sorry, I had to take another sip. All right, sorry. It's the first day of the semester today, and I had a 3-hour class at 8 a.m. So it has been a long day of talking, talking, talking. My voice, my poor voice, it's finally decided to go. All right, so with this example sentence right here, before the storm arrives, I need to put my patio furniture away and I need to move my car. So this first one right here, I'm going to highlight this. This is a dependent clause, before the storm arrives. I need to put my patio furniture away. This is an independent clause. I can't change my highlighter for some reason, sorry. And then I need to move my car. This is an independent clause. So I've got one deep. Why did it underline it? Maybe I can do that. Yep, there we go. All right, so I've got my dependent clause here. I've got an independent clause. I've got an independent clause. So I've got 2 independent clauses and at least 1 dependent clause. So remember, when you have a dependent clause come first before an independent clause, that's why you have to put that comma. See that teeny tiny little comma right there? You got to put the comma after the dependent clause. Well, I've got 2 independent clauses over here, and there's that conjunction in between them. So I got to make sure to put that little teeny tiny comma right there as well. If I were to flip these clauses around and use the exact same clauses but put them in a different order, I need to put my patio furniture away, independent clause. I need to move my car, independent clause. Before the storm arrives, dependent clause. Well, I still am using that conjunction between the 2 independent clauses, so I still got to put my comma right before that conjunction. However, since I put the dependent clause after this independent clause right here, that means I don't have to use a punctuation like I did up here in that previous sentence. Everybody see that? All right, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit because this is pretty small. Here we go. I don't know why my little AI thing keeps coming up. It wants to talk to me so badly. Can a dependent clause be in the middle? It sure can. Mm-hmm. Yep. Let's see. Hold on. Can I add a text box? Hold on. I think I got this. All right. So what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna take those same clauses and I'm gonna show you. Hold on. I need to think. Now this isn't ideal. This is not the best wording, but it's grammatically correct. So all right, I'm gonna zoom back out. I need to put my patio furniture away before the storm arrives, and I need to move my car. Now, like I said, ideally this is not great because um you want to have those ands together. You want to show those connections. But here you have an independent clause, dependent clause, comma, and because it kind of serpentines and just makes that all one sentence together. So then you got to put the comma and then the second independent clause. So yes, you can do that. That is not a dumb question. That's actually a great question. You can do that. It just depends on the wording. Sometimes it's not the best way to do it. All right. So, got 4 sentences here, or 4 questions. I want you to go through. I'm going to put 3 minutes on the timer, or two. No, I'll do 3 minutes on the timer because you got a lot to do here. So, 3 minutes on the timer, and then we'll come back and check them. Okay? Ready, set, and go. All right, about 15 more seconds. All right, let's take a look. So for number 1, you should have put C. Number 2 was B as in boy. 3 is C. And 4 is B as in boy. So C, B, C, B. Any questions? Everybody good? Okay, so number 1, 2, and 4 people had questions about. All right. So for number 1, let's take a look at that one. Which of the following sentences punctuated correctly for a compound? Oh, hold on. I gotta plug in my computer. I thought it was plugged in this whole time charging. All right. So, number 1, which of the following sentences is punctuated correctly for a compound sentence structure? So, compound sentence is what we're looking for. So, that means we're looking for 2 independent clauses. So, with C, remember, I did mention very briefly when we were talking about simple sentences that sometimes you can have extra punctuation in there if it's got one of those introductory phrases or if it's got a transition word. That can kind of throw you off sometimes. So, with what I like to do is I like to go through A, B, C, and D, and I like to check my clauses to see what I've got. Well, with A, although she wanted to go to the beach, that's a dependent clause. So that automatically rules out A being an answer option. Because remember, with excuse me, sorry, my voice. A number with A, with it being a compound sentence, A cannot be an answer option because it's got a dependent clause in it. So that automatically rules it out. Compound sentences only have independent clauses. With B, she wanted to go to the beach. It was raining heavily. Well, we've got 2 independent clauses, but we only put a comma in between the 2. You can't do that. You could put a semicolon in between the 2 or a period, but you can't put just a comma. We needed to have a coordinating conjunction if you were going to have a comma there. With C, despite the heavy rain. Now, many of you probably thought if you put that or if you thought that wasn't correct because you thought, oh, that's a dependent clause. Ask yourself, is that what you thought? Did you think it was a dependent clause? Well, but remember, if it's a clause, it has to have a subject and a verb, but it won't express that complete thought. What's your verb? Despite the heavy rain. Is there a verb? You got a subject, rain, but what's the verb? What's the rain doing? You don't have a verb, so it's not a clause. That's why it doesn't matter about the comma being there because that's not a dependent clause. That's what we call an introductory phrase. That's a trick to try to make you think it's a dependent clause, but because it doesn't have the verb, you have to rule it out that that's not a dependent clause because it doesn't have the verb. Heavy wouldn't be a verb because it's an adjective. It's describing the rain. What type of rain? Heavy rain. So despite the heavy rain, that's not a dependent clause. So that's just an introductory phrase. You just kind of got to mark it out and pretend like it's not there. So then you look at what's left. She wanted to go to the beach. That's an independent clause. She packed an umbrella. That's an independent clause. Oh, there's a coordinating conjunction so right there. That's one of them fanboys. And it's got the comma in front of it. So I've got 2 independent clauses connected by a comma and a coordinating conjunction. So This is going to be added to throw you off, that introductory phrase. So just be careful. That's why I stressed at the beginning so much about you got to check to make sure you actually have a clause. Do you have a subject? Do you have a verb? And then you can determine if you have the complete thought or not. And then I'll tell you if it's a dependent or independent clause. With D, this one was a little tricky too because she wanted to go to the beach. That's an independent clause. Despite it was raining. That's a, wait, what did I just say? She wanted to go to the beach. That's an independent clause. Despite it was raining heavily, that's a dependent clause. Just because they put the comma there, despite is not one of those coordinating conjunctions. It's not one of those fanboys. So fanboys are what are used to connect, if you're going to put the comma there, that's what's used to connect compound sentences to independent clauses. This is a dependent clause. So remember, with compound sentences, you got to have an independent and a dependent clause. I mean, no. Compound sentences, you got to have two independent clauses, just like you did in C. So D is not an option because it's got a dependent and an independent clause. And you got to have two of the independents. Now, somebody asked about number 2, so let's take a look at that one. Choose the sentence that is correctly punctuated for a compound complex sentence. So compound complex sentence, that means you're going to have two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. Well, A, he went to the store, independent clause. He bought some milk, independent clause. Returned home and returned home. That actually is part of he bought some milk. It's just been punctuated incorrectly. So it's not correctly punctuated, so that rules it out. And it doesn't have a dependent clause. Because remember, returned home wouldn't be a dependent clause because it doesn't have a subject. Not in that part of it. It's actually just all tied with that. After he went to the store, dependent clause. He bought some milk, independent. He returned home, independent. So I got two independents and one dependent. Since the dependent came first, I put my comma, check. Bought some milk. He returned home. Those are independent, and I use that coordinating between the two, so I put my comma right in front of it. So check. With after he went to the store, doesn't. Oh, you're talking about like in a timeline of things. Yeah, I can see where that could be kind of confusing. I really meant it to be like, oh, he went to the store and he forgot to get milk, so he had to stop again, and then he went home. That's the thought process I was going there. But remember, you're just looking at the clauses themselves here. So with C, he went to the store, independent, bought some milk. Well, that's not a clause. Returned home, that's not a clause. Oh, that's just all listing. So I just have one simple sentence right there. That's actually just one whole complete independent clause. It's just listing things out. So that's just a simple sentence. D, he went to the store, bought some milk, and returned home after. That's actually another simple sentence. It's just punctuated differently, and those can be punctuated that way. So, well, actually, no, it's punctuated the same as C. It's just I added the word after onto the end of it. What was the other one? Number 4. Okay. So number 4, select the correctly punctuated sentence for a complex sentence. So complex, I'm looking for independent and a dependent. Now remember, it depends on which order, which one you put first, how you're going to punctuate. The dog barked loudly. Independent. When the mailman came home. Dependent. But because my independent is first, I don't need the comma there. So that's why A is incorrect. It's got the correct clauses. It's just that you don't need the comma because the independent clause came first. The dog barked loudly when the mailman came. Well, that's what I was just talking about. The independent clause came first, so we don't need a comma, then the dependent clause. That one's correct. The dog barked loudly, semicolon, when the man came. When the man came is still, like it was in the previous two, it's a dependent clause. I can't put a semicolon. That's only if you have two independent clauses. And D, the dog barked loudly. Oh, the dog barked. I had to like think about that for a second. I was like, that's correct. But it's not, because the dog barked loudly, independent clause. The mailman came, independent clause. It's got that coordinating conjunction with the comma in front of it. So that's actually punctuated correctly. But what's wrong with it? It's got two independent clauses. What type of sentence am I looking for? A complex sentence. That means I got to have one independent and one dependent. This one's punctuated correctly, but it doesn't have the correct clauses and it doesn't make a complex sentence. So that's why D can't be correct for 4. Even though it's punctuated correctly, it's not the correct type of sentence. Are you tired? Like, that's exhausting, isn't it? It's like doing a full-on math equation in my mind. That's how I look at stuff like this. Everybody good now? And this is a lot. This is just like with the spelling. I don't know if you'll get an email with the PDF, but I'll give it to you right now at the end once we finish. Once we finish going through it and making notes like we just have, I'm gonna post it right here in the chat. So you'll have it if you stay logged in. You're welcome. Now, I gotta zoom back out. There are some comma rules that you might want to refresh on. So if you found that you were tripped up on some of those questions, I've added this slide here for you. I know this is mean, but I wanted to do it after, so that way you could kind of see which ones were tripping you up. So this is just to help you now with some of the stuff that may have been problematic for you on the previous slide with those questions. So with comma rules, when you're trying to figure out punctuating sentences and stuff, also keep in mind when you're separating list items. So when you're listing items in a sentence, like I need to buy milk and bread. But that's only two things. I don't need a comma between the two with that conjunction. But if you list 3 or more items, you need to start putting commas. I need to buy milk, comma, bread, comma, and eggs. Now, when you put that comma before the and, when you're listing items like this one, not when we're talking about complex, compound, complex sentences, not those, but when you're listing items, if you put a comma in front of the and, like I did right here in that and that's underlined, I've got 3 items that I'm listing. That's called, by putting that comma in front of that conjunction there, that's what we call an Oxford comma, like Oxford, England. Okay? That's how the English do it. So we used to do it over here in good old America, in American English. We followed that rule just like the English did, because it's English, you get it, haha. But in the past 2 decades, I would say, it's really become prevalent now. It has become acceptable in Americanized English that you don't always have to put the comma before the conjunction. It is grammatically correct to do it either way. You can do it like I did here with the Oxford comma, milk, comma, bread, comma, and eggs. Or you can do the Americanized version and you can say, I need to buy milk, comma. You still have to put the comma there because you're separating without any conjunctions. But you put milk, comma, bread, and eggs. Notice how right there before that conjunction, there's not a comma. That's where the Oxford comma was. Yep. And I put those in the Q bank because I have seen that pop up on tests before in questions. They like to throw that in there because people don't think about the Oxford comma rule. Me personally, I'm going to keep on using the Oxford comma. I like the way the British do it. It causes less confusion. Okay? It creates clarity in your writing. But technically, it is grammatically correct to not use that comma before the and when you're listing things out. Now, like I tricked you on the, you got it. Hmm. Mm, let's talk about that one. I might have you email pre-nursing about that because I want to talk to you about that one. Um, the introductory phrase. If you have an introductory phrase or clause, that could be that dependent clause, make sure that you're putting the comma after finishing his homework, comma. Before the rain began to fall, comma. So this one's an introductory phrase. The second one is a dependent clause. So if you have those introductory phrases or dependent clauses at the beginning of your sentences, make sure that you're separating it with that comma. And then last but not least, if you're offsetting with non-essential or parenthetical elements, so pretty much what that means is like it's an afterthought. It doesn't have to be in the sentence for the sentence to make sense, but it's not quite a clause. Then you offset those almost like you would if you were using parentheses, but instead of parentheses, we use commas in English in our writing sentences and when writing sentences. So, for example, the book, which was written in 1902, is still popular today. The main sentence is the book is still popular today. It's an afterthought, it's just extra information to add, which was written in 1902. So that can be offset with a comma before and a comma after to show that that information is not absolutely needed for that sentence to be a complete sentence. Now, if you have one of these phrases, not clauses, but phrases, and it begins with that, THAT, instead of which. So if it had said the book that was written in 1902, for some reason, I still don't remember this one. If I ever learned it, I don't remember why. But I just remember that if you have that at the start of the phrase, you do not use the comma there. So you would say the book that was written in 1902 is still popular today. You wouldn't put commas. That's the only exception to that rule. Now, here's one that a lot of people forget about or don't know about. If you have two equal adjectives that are being used to describe a noun, you must separate those adjectives by using a comma. So, for example, if I say the little brown dog, well, little and brown are equal adjectives. And what I mean by that is I could flip them around. I could say the brown little dog, and it still essentially means the same thing. It doesn't sound as good, the little brown dog. That sounds better, but it essentially means the same thing. There's a few that it just doesn't work and it doesn't carry the same meaning to it. If that's the case, you don't put a comma. But in this situation, when they do mean or keep the same meaning and they carry the same weight, you put a comma between the two adjectives. Okay? The book of 1902. So down here, the book, which was written in 1902, is still popular today. The main sentence is the book is still popular today. Because I put which was written in 1902 as like an afterthought, giving that extra detail right in the middle of the main sentence, I have to add the commas around it to show that it's not part of the main sentence. It's an afterthought. It's extra information. Now, direct quotation, that can be a real doozy. You really have to pay attention to what the quotes are, what the tags are for the quotes, and you need to check to see what kind of clauses are being used in your quotations. So, for example, if you have I'll be there at 6, she said. The tag is she said. That's telling me who said it. All right. When the direct quotation, I'll be there at 6, comes first and the tag follows behind it, you're going to put a comma instead of a period to show the connection to that tag instead of not tab, tag, and then you put the period at the end. Also, that means that you do not capitalize the S in she because it's still technically flowing in through the sentence. Now, if I put the tag first, I would capitalize and I would say she said, then you put the comma on the right behind that word said, and then you carry on with the quotation and end it with a period. Now, if a quotation ends with a question mark or an exclamation mark, they kind of override commas, and you would not replace them with a comma like you would up here. Typically, if you just said, I'll be there at 6, that would be a period. But because it's got the tag behind it, you put the comma. But if it's asking a question or it's got that exclamation mark, you use those because that's helping guide the tone of the sentence. Is it questioning? Is it exclamatory? So that overrides the comma, but you still include the tag and you still do not capitalize it because it's still technically part and attached to that quotation there. Now be careful because sometimes you'll have a quotation, tag, and then another quotation. If that's the case, you got to look to see how it's being connected to the quotations. Also, look and see if those quotations that are divided by the tag, are they two separate sentences? And if so, if they're two separate clauses, two different independent clauses, then they need to be separated by a period somewhere when dealing with quotations. Now, if it's an independent clause and a dependent clause with a tag in the middle, then you treat it as if it were one sentence just with that tag smack dab in the middle. Okay? And that's a lot of in-depth that we unfortunately don't have a lot of time to go into tonight, but I will give you some practice with it so that way you'll see how you do with it and see if that's something you need to go back and look at. All right, so that being said, I've got 3 practice questions here. I'm going to move. I don't even know how to get rid of this thing. There we go. All right, so 3 questions up here. I'm going to put 3 minutes on the timer and see how you do. Okay, ready, set, and go. All right, let's take a look. So for number 1, you should have put C. Number 2 is A. 3 is A. Let me know if you have any questions. And just to give you a little bit overview, with number 1, the trick is that this was focusing on the use of adjectives. The enormous old oak. So because enormous and old could be used interchangeably, we need to put a comma between enormous and old. Now, the problem with A is that there was also a comma included after old, and it shouldn't have been. It only needed to be included between enormous and old. So that's why A was not correct. B didn't put the comma between the adjectives. It put it after between the adjective and, wait, hold on. No. I'm so sorry. I forgot oak tree. So oak tree. But see, here's the thing. The reason you can't put the comma like they did, or like I did in number 1, is that you can't switch out oak tree. You can't say the oak enormous old tree. That just is way too, that's pushing it. It's not an equal adjective. Old and enormous, they could be used interchangeably. You could switch those around, but not the oak part. So that's why you don't put the comma there. So that's why you just put it between the two. And D didn't have a comma. With number 2, so this one, we put the comma after the introductory phrase. We put a comma between good night's rest and eat a good breakfast because that's separating 2 list items. And then we use the Oxford comma to put the comma before the and when listing the 3rd item. So that one's using the Oxford comma. Number 3, that one can be very difficult because you got to pay attention to the tag. And because, like I said, you got to pay attention to the clauses. So a good night's rest and a hearty breakfast are what you need to do well on the test. That's all technically one sentence together. That quote's just been split by the tag. So that's why you put the comma before and the comma after to show that it's all still one sentence together. Any questions on those? For number 3? Why is C incorrect? Is that for number 3 you're asking? Okay. So a good night's rest and a hearty breakfast are what you need to do well on the test. See how there's a period right after test in C? Do you see that? Okay. And then it's got the tag, his mom said, and his is not capitalized. That period makes it incorrect because it can't be a period. It needs to be a what? You remember what I told you? A comma. Exactly. So that's why C gets ruled out. And it's actually the same reason why D gets ruled out, because they put the comma there, but then what did they do to his? Or what did I do? Because I did it. What's wrong with D? They put the comma, like I said, but you see what his, it's a capital. So you can't do that. You have to have a lowercase because it needs to be. That's because the tags still needed to be connected. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because someone said, but it wasn't capitalized after the question mark or the exclamation mark. And that's because in this sentence, his should not have been, there should not have been a period there, because his should not be capitalized, because the tag needs to be connected to the sentence. So it shouldn't be capitalized. So down here, that shouldn't be capitalized, but it also shouldn't be a period. It needs to be a comma. And with the, where was it? Right there. With the question mark, notice how that one wasn't capitalized. That one wasn't capitalized. It's because that's the tag and it has to be connected to that part of the, or to that quotation mark. I mean, not quotation mark, but to the quotation itself. So that's why you don't capitalize it. And that's why you wouldn't capitalize it here, but you need to make it a comma. That one has the comma, but it's wrong because it's got the capital H. Any other questions? D has a complete thought. Yes, the quotation, a good night's rest and a hearty breakfast are what you need to do well on the test. But because of the tag, his mom said, because that's got to be connected to it, you have to put a comma after test and put the period to round out the sentence at the end after the tag. Because you got to show that the tag's connected to the quotation. So just because the quotation's a complete sentence, you still can't put the period at the end. Okay. So yeah. So say it was a question. Did you get a good night's rest and have a hearty breakfast before your test? Question mark, lowercase h, his mom said or asked. Then you would put the question mark, or then you would put the exclamation mark, because remember, those two, they override a comma. A comma is going to override a period, but an exclamation mark or a question mark is going to override a comma. So you would put those here, and then you would still leave it lowercase for his. Yep. You're welcome. Like I said, those are doozies. You really have to kind of like break it down to see what's where. All right, so we are pushing for time, but if you can hang in there, I'll hang in there and we're going to finish out 1.3. This is a pretty quick section because this is a lot of review from section 2. It's going to be a lot of the same terminology and stuff. Oh, wait, hold on. There's a question. When is there a capital after the quotation? Um, there wouldn't be if you're talking about a tag together. Let me know if that's what you said, if that's what you're talking about, and I'll come back and try to answer it further in the comment section. But let's look at 1.3 if you can stick around for a little bit. So, correct sentence structure. So, for this section, you still have to go through and you're going to look at what we talked about in the previous section. You have to look at the parts of a sentence. So, you need to be able to identify subjects. Who or what is the sentence about? Is there a simple subject? That means there's just one main noun or pronoun in that sentence. If it has a compound subject, because it can, then that means you're going to have two or more subjects that share the same verb. So you're not going to have multiple subjects and multiple verbs. You just have multiple subjects and one primary verb. Now, in a sentence, when you have a subject, you also need to have a verb to have a complete sentence. This can be either a an action verb showing action or a linking verb showing a connection to a relationship of a description. Those are usually harder for people to find. We've talked about clauses. I've put this up here, but this is just a summary of what we talked about. If it's an independent clause, it's a group of words. It's got the subject, it's got the verb, and it makes that complete thought. If it's a dependent clause, it's going to still have that subject and verb. It just will not express that complete thought. Now, in the previous section, E1.2, we talked about how to identify different sentences or different types of sentences. Simple, one independent clause. Compound, two independent clauses. Complex, one independent, one dependent in either order. Compound complex, two independent and at least one dependent. For this section, what you would need to do is they're going to ask you questions. Let me go back about, is this an independent clause or is this a dependent clause? Okay, so this section, they're going to actually focus on identifying individual clauses as answer options. And then you may have to identify different types of sentences. So in 1.2, the focus is all about the punctuation. So you have to be able to identify the sentences and identify the clauses in order to be able to identify correct punctuation. In this section 1.3, same terminology, you still need to be able to identify clauses and you still need to be able to identify sentence types. However, in this one, they're going to ask you as questions, you're going to get asked more directly. Where's the subject? What is this, an independent clause? Is this a dependent clause? What type of sentence is this? Is this a compound sentence? So this one is taking all the skill set that we just learned in 1.2 and they're just asking you more directly. 1.2 is just going to be really broad and you have to do a lot more analyzing. This one, you just have to do a lot more identifying. Does that make sense? So it's really nice because you're using the same knowledge, you're using the same foundational skills you learned, you're just applying them in different ways. So that's why this section goes so much quicker than the other sections because we've already talked about the bulk of it. All right, so what I've got here is we're just going to jump right in. This section, like I said, I don't drag it out because we've already talked about a lot of this already. So for this one, we're going to jump right into the practice. So we've got 1.3. Okay. I've got four questions up here. And like I said, they're very direct. They ask you what you're trying to identify. So I want you to I'm going to put 3 minutes on the timer and then we're going to come back and check. Okay. If I see people are starting to finish up a little earlier, then we'll come back and check sooner. All right. Ready, set, go. We have about 30 more seconds. All right. So for number one, you should have gotten A. Number two, B. 3, C. 4, C. So with number 3, Which of the following is a compound sentence? The cat chased the mouse and scurried away. That would be a simple sentence because it's got one subject, cat, and verb chase, or two verbs, chase and scurried. But because it's got one subject, you know it can only be one independent clause. B, she enjoys singing, dancing, and writing. That's a simple sentence. It's just listing out different items. C, Mary went to the store, independent. Her mom stayed home, independent. So that's a compound sentence. Despite the light drizzle of rain, the sun shone brightly. That's actually a simple sentence because despite the light drizzle of rain, wait, no, hold on. No, that's a complex sentence, excuse me. Despite the light drizzle of rain, that's a dependent clause. The sun shone brightly, that's independent clause. So that would be complex. And then for complex, after she finished her homework, dependent clause, she watched television, independent clause. Any questions? All right. I got one more practice. I might have two, but I've got this other practice right here if you're up for it. All right. I'll put 2 minutes on my timer. I'm just going to put 2 minutes on this one. Ready, set, go. All right. So number one was C, pay your bills on time. That one has what we call an implied subject. Oh, it's got implied you pay your bills on time. Number two, which of the following is a compound complex? Mary went to the store, independent clause. Her mom stayed home, independent clause. They're connected by that coordinating conjunction, but, so that's the compound part of the sentence. Because she was not feeling well, that's a dependent clause. Number three, walking to the park in the rain is a fragment. So C. And then number four, this one's tricky because you have to remember that subjects cannot be included in prepositional phrases. So I just always mark through my prepositional phrases. So each A would be the subject. Most people would think it would be players, but if you recognize that players is in the prepositional phrase, then you recognize that it can't be the subject. Each is actually a pronoun, if you didn't know that. Any questions on that one? All right. Well, that is it for tonight. I do have the QR codes listed at the end of the slides as well. If you need to reach us or if you want to join with us on socials, sometimes we do giveaways, so you might get a free tutoring session or something. SurePass, if you want some more information on that, you can zoom in on that and look at it. And then if you are interested in tutoring, you can actually just scan this QR code and it'll take you directly to our individual links. So there's me for English and reading, there's Shelly for science, and there's Brandon for math. And then someone wanted to know about tutoring. So if you do a one-on-one session, so just you by yourself, it's $75. If you can get a partner, you can actually, there's not any small groups that are currently available right now. So it's $75 for a tutoring session. But like I said, if you join in on socials, you might could get a free one if you win a drawing or win one of the giveaways. All right. So if you don't have any questions, here's a QR if you want to take a survey for tonight. And then give me 1 second. And I know everyone wants the handout for tonight, so I'm going to copy that right now. Give me 1 second. All right, if you're on Zoom, check the chat. You should see a link for a PDF. If you are on Facebook or YouTube, check your comment section to see if you see the link for the PDF. If you do not see it, please let me know. That should take you directly to the PDF files. Awesome. All right. Well, it was so great working with you guys tonight. We really accomplished a lot. Like, this was a big one. A lot to do. It won't open. So when you go to the link, it's not doing anything. Yes, I love Brandon. We have worked together for years. I just clicked on it. I tried to access it like if I were a student, and it's opening up as a internet link. Are you, well, hmm. Can you try to copy the link, like not click on it, but copy it and then go to your Google browser, your Google Chrome browser or something and paste it in? Will it let you do that? Do you have Adobe on your computer or phone that you're on? If you have got the file and you're ready to go for tonight, don't forget, I'll have a reading webinar next week. I'll rotate out. Awesome. Okay. I'm so glad. Whew. I'm going to tell you, technology's not been my friend today. But I will be back next week. I rotate off. Next week I'll be doing reading, so come join in. I'm going to wait around for a few more minutes just to make sure everybody can get access to everything. But if you don't have any questions, I hope you all have a great night. You're welcome. You have a good night as well. All right, I'm going to log us off now. Y'all have a good week.